Mr. North, it's nice to be able to talk to you today. Wonder if we could just begin by talking about how long your family has been in Acworth.
Ann and I moved here in 2000. We bought a home here in May of 2000. So 21 years.
So, and what brought you to Acworth?
We owned several Jiffy Lube franchises at the time, and they were in Cobb County, Cherokee County, and we were looking for a place to. I was driving from Lithonia to Acworth every day for about 2 years, and that got old, and we decided we would move up, and we landed in Acworth, and we fell in love with it, and we've been here ever since.
And you have a brother who?
I have a brother who lived here for about 15 years, and several.
Was that before you moved here, or?
About the same time.
About the same time.
He moved here shortly after we did, and then several years ago, my stepmother passed away and left her house to him, and so he moved back into that house. Yeah.
Well, why don't you talk a little bit about your background before you got to Acworth? Where did you grow up and go to school and things like that?
I was born in Atlanta and moved to DeKalb County, or South DeKalb, Decatur, when I was about 10 or 12 years old. And then Ann and I married in 1980, and we lived in apartments for a few years. Then we built a house in Lithonia, and we were in that house 15 years, and then we moved to Acworth in 2000.
Okay, so you must have been born about the late 50s maybe, or
Very late 50s, yes.
or 60s?
No, it was 50s,
Okay.
1959.
Okay. Well, where'd you go to school?
Went to school, elementary school in Decatur, South DeKalb, and then I went to St. Peter and Paul Catholic Church for 2 years, which was also in Decatur, and then I went downtown to St. Joseph Catholic School.
Mm-hmm.
Although we were not Catholics, it was a good choice of school for me, and so that's what we did, yeah.
Okay. And then what'd you do after that?
Did not go to college. My early teenage years, up until my mid-20s, I worked in and managed drive-in theaters. And so that's what I was doing, and that's where I met my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, of course, drive-in theaters went by the wayside slowly but surely. And then I wound up in the restaurant business, and I worked for Del Taco Restaurants for about 11 years as a district manager or district director, managing several units. And then they closed, and I went to work for Jiffy Lube. I worked for Jiffy Lube. I was in the system about 12 years. 5 of those years as a regional director of franchise operations. I managed the relationship between the franchisee and the franchisor. And then we bought 2 stores for one of our existing franchisees. And we bought 2 more a couple of years later, and then we sold them about 4 years after that. And I currently work for Georgia Funeral Care here on Main Street, and I've been there a little over a year. I was at Life University for about 10 years, almost 10 years.
Ask about it. What were you doing for Life University?
Everything I've always done has been managing businesses, and I was managing the operations of the clinic, the outpatient clinic, where the general public comes to in for care, and the students are in their last 2 quarters. They're doing their clinicals in that building, and I managed the business end of it. Mm-hmm. And then someone mentioned the P word, pandemic, and within 3 weeks we sent 4,000 students and 40 employees home, and my job never came back. So I wound up working with Kevin Marcy then at Georgia Funeral Care, and love it. Yeah.
So that's just since the pandemic then?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
I wanted to ask you too, your first job as about a 10-year-old, I guess.
Yes.
You were talking about drive-in theaters.
Yes. My mother cashiered in a drive-in theater, and so my first job was probably about 10 or 11 years old, and I popped popcorn, and I earned $2 for every 50-pound bag of popcorn that I popped. And then you could not do this now, but for the first 3 or 4 years I worked under an older brother's Social Security number. You can never get by. I was too young, but you could never do that today. But we did that when we were
You
kids.
used your
My
older brother?
had a brother 3 years older than me, and we used his Social Security number because I was so young.
So you were like 13
Right.
and
Yeah.
working?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you really just like to work, I guess. You
Worked
wanted
all
to
my
work.
life. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you were talking, in the little questionnaire that you filled out about your fondest memories, and you talked about your mother and the roles that she assumed, and you want to talk a little bit about your background and what your mother had to go through?
Sure. I'm the baby of 4 boys, and I had brothers that were 3, 10, and 11 years older than me. And my parents separated and divorced by the time I was in the 1st grade. Mm-hmm. And that was very unusual for those times. In fact, I went all the way through elementary school and high school without ever having a classmate who didn't have a mom and dad at home. I think in the 5th grade, one of my classmates lost their dad to a heart attack. And in the 10th grade, one of my best friends lost his mom to a disease that neither one of us had ever heard of. It was called breast cancer. But nobody talked about it at that point. But Mom took over. She did what any mom would do. And she stepped into the role of mom and dad, and she raised the 4 of us. She raised us well. I always laugh. I see in the grocery store, I'll be at the store, and parents will be negotiating with their children. And my mother never negotiated. She never you got 2 choices, take it or leave it. It's not a question of what you're going to get if you behave. You know what you're going to get if you don't behave. And she did an outstanding job. She raised us 4 of us by herself. And part of that was she worked all day as a bookkeeper 5 days a week, and she cashiered 7 nights a week in a drive-in movie theater for years and years. Yeah.
So you were a latchkey kid.
I tell people I was raised in a broken home or a single-parent home, raised by a single mom, and I was a latchkey child 25 years before any of those phrases were ever coined. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we all 5 survived it, all 4 boys, and my mother survived it.
What are the other brothers doing nowadays?
One of them is a welder, been a welder since trade school, right after high school. One of them was a Matco tool franchisee for 47 years, and he's retired now. And the oldest one passed away about 10 years ago.
Okay. Well, you're talking about you came to Acworth about the year 2000. Business brought you here. Mm-hmm. And you want to just talk a little bit about your business in Acworth. How were you received when you came here?
The business, one of them was in Acworth with the Acworth mailing address, but it was actually in Cherokee County. Mm-hmm. And then the other 3 were in Cobb County, so that we weren't within the city limits of Acworth. But we've loved it since day one. Now, I will tell you that when I ran for office, I spent the first 10 years that I lived here convincing people that the fact that I was born in Atlanta did not mean I was a foreigner. But
did you feel that way?
No. I think that there were people that were thinking that I was pretty young and had not lived here long enough to be seeking a city council seat, and they were probably right. But I ran and didn't make it, and ran again and didn't make it, but finally I did.
Oh, when did you first run?
I ran in 2004.
So you'd only been here 4 years?
Only been here 4 years, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was soon for a little small town, but we never felt anything but welcomed.
Who did you lose to in 2004?
Tim Houston.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh, yeah.
Okay. And then you said you ran again and didn't?
Ran in 2007 and lost to Gene Pugliese.
Okay.
And then I ran in 2011 and tried to unseat a 10-year incumbent and came within 42 votes of doing that, Bob Weatherford.
Yeah.
And then 2.5 years into that term, Bob resigned to run for county commissioner, and I ran for his seat and finally got it.
Well, it sounds like you got along pretty well with those you ran against.
Absolutely, yeah. And serving on the city council is absolutely one of the greatest honors of my life, and I have really, really enjoyed it.
What attracted you to at least Acworth politics?
I've always had an interest in government, and I've always had an interest in politics. And my wife's father, my father-in-law, was one of the greatest men I've ever known. I only knew him for 9 years, but before he passed away. But he served on the city council in the little town that they lived in East Tennessee for 6 years. And
town?
Kingston,
Oh, really?
over near Harriman, Oak Ridge, over in that area. Yeah. They came. He was World War II veteran. They settled in Oak Ridge after he came back from World War II. He was actually, when he shipped out, they were pregnant with my wife, but they didn't know it. And my wife was almost 3 years old before he ever saw her. And there was no TikTok or FaceTime or voicemail or email or anything like that. So he didn't see her until she was almost 3 years old. And there's a picture hanging on the wall in our bedroom that is so faded you wouldn't be able to read it if I showed it to you, but it's a telegram that her daddy sent her on her first birthday. Just, happy birthday, wish I could be there, love you, daddy, or something like that. But he was overseas.
Wow. There's a big TVA steam plant in Kingston.
Yes. And they lived on Lake Wattsbar, which was on the lake. And then when they retired, sold their house, and moved into an apartment, Ann's sister and her husband bought the house. And they were there, if you remember, when the dam for the coal ash retention pond broke. And they were on a little peninsula with 27 houses, and the TVA bought 100 houses, but they bought that entire peninsula. It picked up one house and moved it across the street and sat it back down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the first stop out of Knoxville on
Yes.
I-40.
Yes.
It's Kingston. Wow. And there's a city councilwoman, or used to be councilwoman in Cartersville, Diane Tate, that's from there.
Didn't know that.
So, okay, so you had that influence at least, and to make you maybe interested in local politics.
Yeah.
Or politics in general. And
Yeah, and I always cringe when people say politics, because I know that by technical definition I'm a politician, but
yeah.
I like to consider myself as a public servant. And it's not a very political position. We all get along well, we work well together, and we've accomplished a lot of good things for the city as a team.
I wanted to ask you about that, because it does seem, from an outsider's perspective, that you all got along unusually well, even though you've got a pretty fairly diverse. I mean, you're all male, but you're still different personalities, and you seem to get along well. How did that come about, or do you think that's typical?
No, it's not at all typical. And we do get along well. That doesn't mean that we don't disagree. It means that we have agreed that we won't disagree in public. We don't blast each other on Facebook. We don't air any dirty laundry on Facebook. We talk about it. We rationalize. We try to reach a consensus, and usually we do. Every now and then we'll see a 3-2 vote or a 4-1 vote, and I always remind everybody that that is perfectly healthy. That means that our system is working the way it was designed to work. But for the most part, we work at it until we come to something that we can all live with and all agree with. And I'd have to say a lot of that is the result of Tommy and the effort that he puts into keeping the conversation going and trying to reach a consensus. And usually we're able to, but we do get along very well.
So you're really saying that the decisions are made before you get together and in a meeting of the Board of Aldermen?
No, not at all. We have work sessions the Monday of each week before, like this week, we'll meet tonight, Thursday night, but we had a work session on Monday, and we'll sit there and it'll be whatever we're looking at, a subdivision or whatever. And, some people will like it and some people won't. We'll talk about, well, what would it take? Had one recently that was a large subdivision that was fairly controversial, and I couldn't support it because most of the houses had one-car garages. And I know that one-car garages mean one-car driveways. And I know that one-car driveways means cars on the street. And so, that was my opposition to it. And when the ultimate question came, what would it take for you to support this? I said 2-car garages on every house. And we were able to get that, which was a good thing for the city, because the 1-car garages and 1-car driveways are just not. They're not in the best interest of anybody.
So the work sessions where you really need to go to if you want to have influence.
The work sessions, public comment is allowed at the city council meetings, but not at the work sessions. But if you want to watch us walk a project through the process, then the Monday night work sessions are the place to do that. We'll have a lot of times, there'll be Boy Scout troops that show up for Thursday night as part of their requirement to visit a local government meeting. And we'll always say Monday night's your best night, because by the time you get to Thursday night, most of it is on what we call a consent agenda, and we may approve 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 items all at with one vote. But we've already voted and worked out what it is that we want to do in those work sessions. So that's where the action happens probably.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Tommy Allagood, and I guess you said he worked hard at building consensus. You're talking about in the work session, or do y'all talk during the week, or?
No, in the work sessions. I mean,
Okay.
sure, there'll be a conversation every now and then if we run into each other at Lacey's or something like that. But we work hard to not make any decisions, or we won't get together. More than 3 of us won't get together at the same time. Even here in City Council, it's time for a Thursday night, and if there's 2 people already in Tommy's office, and a third of us gets ready to come in, Doug Haney will say, "No, y'all need to stop. One more, and there's a quorum. We're not going to do that."
Oh, yeah,
So
okay.
he keeps us in check. Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say the MDJ and the newspapers may object
Yeah.
if you're making your decisions, without them present, without announcing them.
Yeah. No, not at all.
Okay.
No.
But still, you all managed to, but you're basically saying because you want to work together and treat each other with respect.
We're committed to working with each other. We're committed to treating each other with respect, and we're committed to do what we believe is best for the citizens of Acworth.
Do you think it helps that you don't run on a party label?
I do. Absolutely.
I was just thinking that people in the U.S. Congress could learn a lot from watching what you all are doing.
That's true.
I think civility's gone by the board in
Yeah.
Washington, at least.
I believe you're probably right, unfortunately.
Well, so you ran several times, and finally, Bob Weatherford went on to other things. Started to say bigger and better, but I'm not sure that's the case. He went on to the
County Commissioner,
Commission, and you came in 2014. Why don't you just talk a little bit about how you campaigned and what kind of issues you ran on?
It was interesting when you're out knocking on doors, and I knocked on more than 2,000 doors in 2014. You get questions like, are you a Democrat or a Republican? It's a nonpartisan race.
So that's the way you answered?
I would say, well, it's a nonpartisan race. I'm an independent. I vote for the person I think can do the best job.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had people say, well, what are your thoughts on the military? And of course, city council is like the bottom rung of the, not even the ladder, but the step stool. Yeah. Or what's your position on health care, And so you get a lot of those questions. But people would say, well, what's your agenda? Why are you running? What are you going to change? And I could truthfully say I think that we're in good shape. I think that we're doing a good job. There's an empty seat. I want to serve, and I'm perfectly willing to crawl in the boat and help row. And that was my typical answer, because I didn't have a grudge. I wasn't running for any agenda or any purpose. A lot of times you have people run because they can't get their trash can replaced, or there was a pothole on their street or whatever. But that's not a reason to run. A reason to run is because you want to serve. Mm-hmm. And you've got a servant leader's heart. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've been impressed with people in local government in general, because you don't get paid that much to be on Board of Aldermen, and it's a lot of work, and I don't think I could sit through all those meetings that you sit through.
And they can add up over time, but I love it. I love what I do. I really do.
So it's really a matter of motivation of wanting to be of service.
Yeah. And of course, I've served all my life. That my spiritual gift is service. Service and mercy, and those two go really well together if you're blessed with two spiritual gifts. Mm-hmm. And so I've served people in some capacity, others in some capacity, for as long as I can remember. I like it.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit? And I know One Heart Church, you were one of the charter members of that church.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about what One Heart Church is and where it is and what you did with it?
My wife and I were members of First Baptist Atlanta for 22 years, and one of our pastors there felt called to start a church of his own, and so the One Heart Church was formed. We met our first Sunday, about 70 of us in a borrowed banquet room at the Ravinia Club, which was over in Dunwoody, because of course First Baptist Atlanta was in Dunwoody, and we began or helped to set that up. We moved into a warehouse about 3 months after that, and spent about $250,000 building it out. And we did that remaining debt-free. We didn't borrow any money to do it. We had some really good gifts that allowed us to do that. And we were there for 5 years, 6 years, and then we bought the campus of the First Baptist Church of Norcross. They were down to about 100 members, and there were some financial issues, and we were able to buy their paper, their mortgage, if you will, and buy the property. And if I remember right, 99 of them, of the 100, voted to sell to us. One voted not to. And 99 of those members stayed with us.
Oh, really?
And most of them are probably still there. We drove from Acworth to Norcross, 35 miles, 45 minutes or so every Sunday morning. And there came a point just a few months before the pandemic that it became a hard day for my wife. By the time we got up and got ready and drove over and did Sunday school and did church and then had lunch with folks after church and then drove back, and it was a 6, 7 and a half hour day. And so we began to look around, and we started attending North Star Church. And then when the pandemic came along, we now go to church, her and her recliner and her tablet and me at my desk on my desktop computer. And I had breakfast this morning with Mike Lynch, and we were talking about that, and it's just that's just what works for us at this stage in our life right now. But I hope that we'll get back into the church this coming year.
So, well, I mean, I know there's a lot of people that have been attending remotely since the pandemic started.
I have a small nonprofit that's 10 years old. It's a ministry.
I wanted to ask you about that. Mike mentioned too, you were on the board of directors for One Heart Church.
I served 8 years on the board of directors at One Heart Church.
And then I wanted to ask you about the name, Tetelestai Mission Ministry.
Tetelestai.
Telestai.
Tetelestai.
Okay, did I have a T in there that shouldn't have been there?
I don't know. But it's a Greek word. It translates literally, it is finished. It is finished. So we know that in our Bibles there was a point when Christ was on the cross where he made the statement, it is finished, and bowed his head and gave up the spirit. In the book of John, the original scriptures, John spoke Greek. And so he used the word tetelestai twice, on verse 19 and verse 21, I think it was. But, and of course, we know the famous one, which was, it is finished. And then one time earlier, when we know that the Bible to say, when the scriptures had been fulfilled, and John again used the word tetelestai. In historic times, the word tetelestai was stamped on a debt when the debt had been paid in full or when a contract had been satisfied. And so that's the John knew when he wrote the original scripture that if he used the word tetelestai, that his Greek reading people would know. Tetelestai.
Tetelestai.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and every now and then you'll see it spelled without the A, but everything that I did and when I did the paperwork and incorporated 10 years ago, that's the way I had always seen it spelled.
Okay. So what exactly does your ministry do?
We started out doing work in local municipal jails, and we would provide electronic libraries, CDs, CD players, batteries with Christian music and sermons and so forth. And then at Christmas time, we would deliver gift bags, and the gift bags would have a Bible and a note of encouragement and some various snacks and stuff. Or one of the Sunday school classes at church, the children would make Christmas cards, homemade Christmas cards for them, and things of that nature. And we would provide Bibles year-round to several of the jails. And then we did some work, or still do some work, in orphanages in Eastern Europe. And most of that would be, I would go over once a year, but we would provide financial support for stockings and stuff like that for the children in the orphanages at Christmas time. And we did some work in nursing homes and assisted living centers and things of that nature. We do sing-alongs and little socials and things of that nature. And of course, and then we got into drug and alcohol rehab centers, and that became a big part of our ministry. But the pandemic changed the way we do business, if you will. And we're optimistic that 2022 is going to bring us a brighter opportunity to get back into some of those things that we've been doing.
Do you have a staff or?
No. We operate our corporate headquarters as the south end of our dining room table.
Well, is it like a nonprofit where
It's
people might contribute to?
Yes, sir. It's a 501c3. We went through the whole certification process and everything, and we do newsletters, and we have supporters that send contributions. And surprisingly enough, the mainstay is the person that sends $25 every month. But there are some larger contributions that come in from time to time. Yes.
25 a month is a pretty big contribution by the end of.
By the end of the year, yeah. We actually started that in. I don't have any idea where the idea came from, but in 2016, I asked 20 people to commit to doing $16 a month, and then it goes up every year. So right now it's $21, and I've got about 25 people that send $21 every month.
How big a budget do you have?
Probably somewhere in the $10,000 to $12,000 a year range, depending on what we do.
Well, it sounds like you're doing a lot with a relatively small amount of money.
Yes, yeah, we do. My wife is a big part of making that happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how many volunteers would you say?
It varies, and it depends on what we do. We were doing evangelical events in the drug and alcohol centers, and that would take 15 to 20 people. We would gather those up from our church, but probably most of the time 4, 5, 6, depending upon what we were doing. Yeah, 3 of those unfortunately did not survive the pandemic, so
Really?
we'll have to regroup when we.
You mentioned a number of people in Acworth that have had an influence on you.
Yeah.
Ben and Sylvia Flanagan, we've interviewed both of them for this project. Could you talk about how you knew them and how they were an influence, or how they are an influence?
Yeah. We, and I hated to start listing names because there would be somebody I missed or would miss, I'm sure. But Ben and Sylvia and Ann and I have grown very close over the years, and we'll see each other several times a year for dinner, and they've been to our home for Thanksgiving dinner a couple of times and stuff like that. But and Ann and my wife are Ann and Sylvia are in a book club together, and they just met for their Christmas get-together yesterday for the first time in 2 years. They had to cancel because of the pandemic and the epidemic of the first Christmas. But they're just good people, and we enjoy spending time together. Yeah. I served with Ben on the Planning and Zoning Commission for 9 years before I became an alderman, so we go back quite a ways.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, well, we hadn't even talked about that, so. So you were involved in city government before you got it?
Volunteer position as a planning and zoning commissioner. I did that for 9 years.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I can see then why you might have been connected, why you might have been running for office,
Yeah.
because you were really already involved.
True. Yes.
So, and on the planning and zoning, what all, you're an advisory body, I guess. at that
Recommending
time,
body. Yes.
Board of Aldermen.
And I also served 10 years as the president of our homeowners association, and that was at about the same time, and able to make sure that we got remembered, and we were out on Highway 41, removed from the downtown historic part, if you will, and so it was a good opportunity to make sure that we also kept focused on our neighborhood's best interest as well. But the plan of zoning is a recommending body, and so a new subdivision, a new shopping center goes to them first, and then they make a recommendation to the city council. And the city council typically follows that recommendation. I don't know, I'm sure there have been times where where we went a different direction, but not that I recall.
You mentioned Chief Wayne Dennard. We just interviewed him in the last year.
Did you?
Talk about how he has been an influence.
I would say the chief and I are close as well. And we've had lots of conversations about our faith and so forth. And Chief just sets a good example as to what a godly man and a godly husband and a godly father would look like. And I've always respected that. And even in times of rough situations with the police department, you'll see the compassion come out of him as he deals with families that are involved in tragedies and so forth. He's just a good man.
And you mentioned James Albright also, who's
Ditto.
city manager now.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, just a good man, a good family man, and I have the utmost respect for both of those guys.
Okay. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about how you've seen Acworth change, because it really has changed a lot since you got here.
Yeah.
20 years ago, 21 years ago.
Yeah.
How has it changed?
I say this all the time, and I'm sure people get tired of hearing it, but when we first moved here, you could have stood in the middle of Main Street at Lacey's and fired a cannon towards the post office. You wouldn't have scratched a single car. There's just was nothing here. A friend of mine brought me up to downtown for lunch. We went to Daddy's Country Kitchen one day, and a little buffet, I think it was his and hers, that was down a couple blocks downtown, and there was just nothing here. Mm-hmm. And of course now downtown is so vibrant, and there are very few vacant storefronts, and we're a dining destination, and so many people here, and it's just, and of course the population. I want to say when I moved here it was about 4,500, and I think today it's about 24,500, and a lot of that is through aggressive annexation. Excuse me. Aggressive annexation, and then just plain growth. Somebody looking to develop every square inch of dirt that they can find.
Aggressive annexation. What have you annexed into the city?
Well, there have been a number of parcels that have been annexed into the city over the years. Before we got here, I mentioned that we lived on Highway 41. There are 4 subdivisions over there, probably totaling about 1,200 homes. And all of that land was annexed into the city limits before those homes were built. I'm trying to think. Well, the whole time that we lived in Blue Springs subdivision, our mailing address was Kennesaw. But we were in the city limits of Acworth, and those go back to the rural rural mail routes of the 50s. Mm-hmm. You'll find Acworth mailing addresses in 4 different counties, actually: Cobb, Cherokee, Paulding, and Bartow. But of course the city limits are much smaller. I think probably about 8 to 10 square miles.
And all the way over to Bells Ferry Road is Acworth.
Yes. One of our Jiffy Lubes was an Acworth mailing address, but it was between Wade Green and Bells Ferry.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So those are all from back of the rural mail delivery days?
From back in the 50s. Yeah. And there are as many houses in Acworth with Kennesaw mailing addresses as there are houses in Kennesaw with Acworth mailing addresses. And the two cities would gladly swap out, but they say that it would literally take an act of Congress and the postmasters to agree, and so
Not
that's
gonna
probably
happen.
not going to happen. Yeah.
Well, so Acworth has changed over time, and you've done a little bit of annexation. Oh, I wanted to ask you on the annexation is, does it typically take place that somebody comes to the city and says, we want to build a subdivision here, but we'd like to be annexed into the city?
That's typically how it happens.
Okay.
Or I've got a piece of land I'd like to annex it into the city.
So it's not a hostile annexation, like you said, we want to take this away from Cobb County?
No,
Make
no.
it part of Acworth?
No. And one of the first things that happens when someone does request an annexation is Cobb County weighs in with an opposition, or we oppose, or we're okay with it. Doesn't mean it doesn't still happen if they oppose it sometimes, but
So
they weigh in at one of the
how
first
long do
steps.
they typically oppose, or half and half? Or?
No, they typically will go along with it.
Okay.
Yeah. Unless it creates an island or something like that, then they're
So
reluctant.
why does somebody come and say, we want to be part of Acworth before we build our subdivision? What do they gain from being in the city?
I think that there are some differences in zoning and what they might be able to do here versus in the county. And I think
Like
that
you might be more open to a one-car garage, or?
could be
whatever.
more density, could be the different zoning allows for more density or allows for taller structures, or there are square foot minimums that may be different here than there are in the county and that type of thing. And then Acworth has a reputation for being user-friendly. We hear repeatedly from developers that we're so much easier to deal with, and it doesn't mean that we reduce our standards, but we jump on it and we do it. And if a developer asks for something, we get it, and we're more efficient, I guess, than some folks.
Does Acworth have a pro-business reputation, you think?
I think absolutely. We have a good relationship with most all of our businesses as well. And here again, we work at that. But yeah, and we have a good relationship with our churches as well.
I guess, one of the questions that was on the questionnaire, what makes Acworth special to you? How would you sum it up?
It's the total package. I mean, you could live in the you could never leave the city limits of Acworth and find pretty much everything you need. Now, can I buy a new Ford here? No, but I can buy a new car here. And almost every restaurant you could want is here. There's plenty of shopping. Most of the national chains are out on Highway 41. My wife fusses at me. I'll say, we have to drive all the way across town now because we moved about 6 years ago to the other side of town. And she's, Brett, it's a 3-mile drive. Get over it. Let's go. But it's just a special place. And I haven't lived that many places, but we lived in Stone Mountain, we lived in Norcross, and we lived in Decatur before moving here. And it's just different than from any place that I've ever lived. And I call it this wonderful little city that we call home, and that's really what it is. Bob Weatherford used to say we were Mayberry on steroids, and that's probably a pretty good description. We've just got everything that we need here. It's just a wonderful little city.
But what are your future plans? You're going to stay on the Board of Aldermen, or?
I will, as long as the citizens will have me, and as long as I'm having fun, and as long as I can do it and do it well, I will. And we may not have been born here, but we're going to die here.
And you're going to continue working for Georgia Funeral?
Probably so, yeah.
For the foreseeable
For
future?
foreseeable future, yeah. I'm 6 or 8 years away from being ready to retire.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you about your current job, that it's part of the job is community relations, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Could you explain this exactly what your job is?
I work with families that want to plan ahead, want to pre-arrange funerals, pre-fund funerals, things of that nature. And then I'm also, I work in community relations or community affairs. We are an affiliate of and a network provider of Veterans Funeral Care, which is a network of almost 200 funeral homes, really nationwide, but more heavily probably on the East Coast. And so we do, I visit veterans meetings and we take, Cobb County has several senior centers, and there's a weekly veterans meeting every week, and we'll go and participate in those, and I've spoken at a couple of those. And we'll take donuts and coffee or whatever, just that kind of thing, and just kind of, promote the name. And last month, I chartered a bus, and we put almost 45 veterans on it, and took a day trip up to Toccoa and visited the Band of Brothers Military Museum in Toccoa, had lunch, and came back. We stopped in an apple orchard and bought some produce. It was we left at 8 and got back about 4:30. So just that kind of stuff, that kind of PR stuff, and I can talk to pretty much anybody about anything, so I'm probably pretty good at it.
Or is there anything you'd like to add to the interview that we haven't talked about?
Now, I think we've covered quite a bit, but I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts with you. But yeah, it's just I was surprised to be asked because I haven't lived here as long as most of the people that have been interviewed, and I haven't been as involved as so many of them have for so many years. But we hit the ground running, and I have been involved in as many things as I could, as often as I could, and we just love it here. There's no place like Acworth.
All right. Well, I'm out of questions.
Okay.
So we'll just wind it up at this point.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.